style of thinking. So we use the words divergent and convergent to describe different ways of thinking about the world. So divergent is when we're exploring for new possibilities. Convergent is when we have a list of options, like after a brainstorm, and we want to pick the best one or ones. From rigorous study of innovation is multiple iterations of this divergent and convergent cycle is best. Very often we brainstorm, we pick an idea, and we try to implement that idea. But if we did a couple more iterations of refinement, we could improve the quality of the idea enormously. So one of the things that we teach people is don't try to come to closure too soon. An open-ended design process can be very, very productive. So another characteristic or aspect of the innovation process is getting new information. I very often am contacted by corporate executives who say, we don't have any more good ideas anymore. And the first obvious question is, well, what input are you looking at? What's your information? Are you sending people out to go discover new ideas? Are you reading the same magazines you used to read? Are you reading different ones? Are you reading different books? Because if you don't get new input, then it's really hard to get new output. So, again, a tool that we use is we force feed people, not literally, but we give people lots of information and we ask them to assimilate it very quickly. And that can be very productive to helping people see possibilities that they didn't see before. Diversity is also very important for innovation. Diversity of perspectives, genders, races, cultures, backgrounds. So when we can get diverse teams together, we almost always get better results than if we have teams of people who come from very, very similar backgrounds. So to Jim's point about creative risk, the thing that we like to emphasize around risk is the notion of creative tension. By this we mean that in your mind you can envision a future world, and in the reality that's in front of you, you see a world which is not as good as the one you envisioned. And the gap between those two, the real and the envisioned, is the source of creative tension. That's where creative tension comes from. And in the innovation process, we want to harvest that tension and make it work for us by taking the energy that it brings to each of us and enabling us to do work as a result of that. So creative tension and creative risk are both very, very important in the innovation process. Speaking of fear and fearlessness, so this is a comment from somebody at Apple about Sony as a company. Now, if you follow the business page at all, or you like to follow stocks, so a line like this would describe the value of Apple stock over the last 10 years, and a line like this would describe the value of Sony stock over the last 10 years. And because they compete in many similar industries, somebody happened to make a comment about Sony, somebody from Apple, that I was able to capture. So remember, Sony was the company that invented the Walkman and the miniature transistor radio, and, produced the best TVs in the world. This maybe before some of your times. But anyway, Sony used to be really admired as a great, great company. And now we're not sure how we feel about them. But the comment here is that I'm trying to draw attention to is that from Apple's perspective, dealing with them across the table, insider, not looking publicly, but this is people dealing with engineer. The fear of making a mistake has suppressed or killed Sony's innovation culture. That's the inference here from Apple. And if you think back about the comment I made earlier about being wrong, the quote from Jonathan Ive, that really sets the contrast up pretty clearly. This is a comment from a guy at Toyota. You all know what a Scion car is, right? Yeah, so this was Jim Farley made this comment. Jim Farley was the guy who was in charge of creating the Scion. So he led the team that created the Scion. So he got to pick the team members, he recruited the team members to be on the team with him. And this is what he said. He wanted to find great people, and then I've left some words out because I need you to supply them for me. Great people who will do what in a meeting?
Disrupt.
Challenge each other?
Basically, but even more than that.
Disagree?
Exactly. And not just disagree, that disagree with him being the boss of the team, right? If people did not have the willingness or the ability or the courage to tell Jim when he was wrong, that he knew that things would not go as well as he wanted them to go. So he had to have people who were brilliant at what they did, but also willing to tell him, Jim, you're wrong about this, and this is why. And that's challenging in many, many organizations. As Tracy mentioned, I do a lot of work in China, and you simply don't tell your boss he's wrong, which leads to all kinds of organizational problems because all kinds of wrong things happen if you can't deliver that message. So, as you figured out here, I'm just listing a whole lot of qualities and characteristics about the innovation culture. So that's going to be sort of half of my presentation. I just want to expose you to some of these ideas. Then the other half, we're going to talk about how you can nurture that culture in your organization. So, this one we forgot to fix. So the slide is about prototyping and the importance of prototyping. And so, let's see. I'm going to let it go again and see if we can see. Is it animate correctly? Did I not go back for it? Oh, there it is. There you go. Yeah. So that literally was a prototype. That was an expo marker, a film canister, which maybe you remember there was a thing called film we used to buy, and a clothespin held together with tape. That was literally a prototype for a medical device, and that's the medical device. So the point about prototyping is that you have an idea, and you could spend weeks or months or years designing it so it's perfect, or you could spend 5 minutes putting together a prototype and learn a whole lot more, a lot faster. So in the design disciplines and in the practice of innovation, we always talk about rapid prototyping. The faster you can prototype and test, the faster you will learn and the faster you will progress. And there's a comment from a guy, David Kelly, who teaches at Stanford and leads a very famous product design firm. And I'm paraphrasing here, but the gist of the comment is that rapid prototyping will outperform the best engineer who's thinking linearly every time. Doing it rapidly, rapid testing, refinement will outperform even the greatest engineer in the world if that engineer is thinking in a linear fashion and trying to solve the problem in a linear fashion. His way of saying it's a lot more elegant, but that's what he's trying to convey. Teams are critical to innovation, largely because the complexity of the problems that you're trying to solve is so great that it usually requires many people working together, because you have, in a for-profit organization or a non-for-profit organization, you have marketing people, program people, finance people, operations people, HR people, who all have a piece of the solution, and they have to be able to work together effectively in order to actually craft a solution that is meaningful for the organization. So lots of teamwork, which means skills managing teams, skills putting teams together, and skills being a team participant, knowing how to work effectively on a team. It also takes time. One of the problems that was pointed out in the Path to Innovation paper is that innovation takes time. If no one has time to innovate, then there won't be innovation if we're all so busy with the day-to-day. So, the picture of Einstein on his bicycle, the urban legend is that when he got stuck with a problem, he would either ride his bicycle or play his violin. And that was his way of incubating or taking reflection time. We've all experienced it in one way or another, whether it's taking a walk, or you guys probably take lots of hikes in national parks. That's a way for people, if you get your head all full of a problem, then very often the problem can sort itself out if you take time to reflect or to incubate. And actually, that's literally true of the brain. It is literally true of the brain, that your brain will solve problems when you're focusing on something else. So very often, problems can be solved overnight, and you wake up with a solution because your brain is working while the rest of you is asleep. So I recently read that in some neurophysiology paper in a science magazine, and I was very thrilled because it's something that we've known intuitively, but this was actually scientifically validated. So I thought that was really cool. This is one of the biggest organizational problems around innovation, is it requires you to live with ambiguity. And organizations hate ambiguity. Organizations like predictability and certainty and clarity. And the world of innovation is not like that. The world of innovation is living with I don't know for a long time while you're on this journey to try to figure out what the answer is or what the solution is. It also requires that we deal with a lot of complexity. So that's the freeway system in Shanghai, in case you're wondering what the image is. So it says embracing complexity, sort of there on the screen. Because of the nature of teamwork that's involved in innovation and the mental struggle around finding solutions to really tough problems, people who are engaged in innovation often require our empathy because sometimes you just want to cry. Willingness to deal with failure. 6,000 failures is the story of the light bulb. Now, I've done a lot of online research. I unfortunately did not have the opportunity to ask Edison directly, but I've seen numbers ranging from hundreds to thousands for how many experiments they did. In particular, what they were looking for was the correct material for the filament of the light bulb, which is the piece that actually glows when it gets electricity running through it. So the sort of the backstory around this is long after the light bulb had been invented and commercialized, and Edison was rich and famous and renowned worldwide, and he, lots of newspaper journalists wanted to interview him. And so one woman was interviewing him, and she basically said, "Mr. Edison, how did it feel to fail 6,000 times?" Because she was coming from the mindset that failure is bad and was painful and would cause someone to be progressively more and more unhappy. Like, imagine you failed 6,000 times, it would be like, hitting yourself on the head 6,000 times. That was sort of her framework for her question. But in his answer, he just turns the whole thing around. He said, no, it wasn't a problem at all. We just knew that wasn't the solution, and we moved on. It turned out that the solution that they finally adopted was one of within the first couple hundred of the materials that they tested, but they just kept on testing until they basically tested everything they could, and then they picked the best one, and it had been hundreds previously. But that was his mindset, and explained why he was so good at innovation, because he didn't take it personally. It wasn't an emotional crisis for him. It wasn't like he was a bad person. It's just like, oh, okay, that didn't work, try something else, which is a mindset that organizations very often have a hard time with. Obviously, it's about exploration. So this is probably a picture of some of you guys, or some of your members. Back to the rock climbing image, because it really is a compelling image. And the way that the climber is looking up, like, that's where I'm going. And the determination around that is quite amazing. So, why discuss this? I've given you a bunch of reasons why. So here's a list of many of the themes that I just covered. I may have even covered all of them, I'm not sure. I didn't talk much about customers. So the red X's are going through the ones that most organizations aren't very good at or don't like at all. So ambiguity, failure, complexity, fearlessness, creative risk, questions, being wrong. These are attributes or characteristics that typically organizations do not embrace, are not enthusiastic about, and certainly don't encourage. And yet if we want to encourage people to be innovative, these are exactly the kinds of things that we want them to think about and deal with all the time. And occasionally we're willing to prototype, and occasionally we're willing to experiment. But basically, you sort of get what I'm trying to communicate with this. And so, of course, the underlying message is that if you want to have an innovation culture, if you're going to journey on the path to innovation, you have to find a way to bring these attributes and qualities and characteristics and processes into the organization in an appropriate way, not in a ridiculous way, but you can certainly reflect on how little or much they might be part of your way of thinking and working today. So what this leads us to is the ability to make a caricature, an oversimplification about two kinds of culture, of organizational culture. One I call the status quo